The notification on my phone made my coffee cup freeze halfway to my lips. Your platinum card ending in 4829 has been charged $149.99 by OnlyFans. I stared at the screen, certain there had to be some mistake. I'm Elena Rodriguez, a 34-year-old corporate attorney who built her life on precision, order, and definitely not subscribing to adult entertainment platforms. My credit card had just been charged for something I'd never purchased, by someone who clearly thought they were clever enough to outsmart a lawyer. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The charge appeared innocent enough at first glance, buried between my grocery store purchase and my monthly gym membership. Most people might have dismissed it as a mistake, called the bank, and moved on with their day. But I'm not most people. I spent my days dissecting financial fraud cases for Fortune 500 companies, and something about this particular charge felt deliberate, personal, and infuriatingly calculated. I set my coffee down on my kitchen island and opened my banking app with the methodical precision I'd learned from years of legal investigation. The OnlyFans charge wasn't alone. Scrolling through 3 months of statements revealed a pattern that made my blood pressure spike with each discovery. February 15th, $99 to OnlyFans. March 3rd, $149. March 20th, $200. Someone had been systematically using my credit card to fund their adult entertainment habits, and they'd been smart enough to space out the charges to avoid immediate detection. Living alone in my downtown Seattle condo, I prided myself on financial security and digital privacy. My credit cards were stored in a locked filing cabinet, my passwords were complex and unique, and I monitored my accounts religiously. Whoever was doing this had access to information that should have been impossible to obtain. The violation felt intensely personal, like someone had been watching me, studying my habits, waiting for the perfect opportunity to exploit my trust. My first instinct was to call the credit card company and dispute the charges, but my legal training kicked in before I could dial. Whoever was behind this fraud had made a critical error in judgment. They'd chosen to steal from someone who understood exactly how to destroy them legally, financially, and professionally. Instead of reporting the theft immediately, I decided to gather evidence first. I wanted to know who was bold enough to steal from me, and I wanted them to face consequences that would make them regret ever learning my name. The charges originated from different IP addresses, but they all traced back to the same geographical area. My home neighborhood. Someone close to me, someone with access to my personal information, was funding their digital entertainment at my expense. The realization sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with Seattle's perpetually gray weather. This wasn't random fraud perpetrated by some distant stranger. This was betrayal by someone in my immediate circle. I pulled out my laptop and began what would become the most satisfying investigation of my legal career. Starting with the OnlyFans charges, I created a detailed spreadsheet documenting every fraudulent transaction. Date, amount, time of day, and any patterns that might reveal the perpetrator's identity. The charges typically occurred on weekends, usually late at night, suggesting someone with regular access to my information, who felt comfortable enough to use my card during their leisure time. My building's security was state-of-the-art, requiring key fob access and maintaining detailed logs of every entry and exit. I contacted the property management company, explaining that I was investigating a security breach without revealing the specific nature of the fraud. Within hours, I had access logs for every person who'd entered my floor over the past 3 months. Cross-referencing these logs with the dates of the fraudulent charges would give me a suspect list. The pattern that emerged made my stomach turn with betrayal and fury. Every single OnlyFans charge corresponded with dates when my building maintenance supervisor, Marcus Thompson, had accessed my floor for routine inspections or repairs. Marcus, the friendly 38-year-old man who'd been working in my building for over 2 years, who'd helped me move furniture, who'd always been professional and trustworthy during our interactions. Marcus had master key access to every unit in the building. He'd been in my condo dozens of times for legitimate repairs, installations, and annual safety inspections. He'd seen my home office, my filing system, and had ample opportunity to memorize my credit card information during his visits. The trust I'd placed in him as a building employee had been systematically violated for months, while he funded his personal entertainment with my money. But I needed more than circumstantial evidence before taking action. Suspicion wasn't enough to destroy someone's life, even someone who'd been stealing from me. I needed proof that would hold up in court and ensure that Marcus faced serious consequences for his theft. My legal background had taught me that the difference between suspicion and conviction lay in the quality of evidence presentation. I scheduled a routine maintenance request for my kitchen faucet, something minor that would require Marcus to spend time in my home while I was present. Before his arrival, I installed a small security camera in my home office, positioned to capture anyone who might enter the room during the appointment. I also set up motion-activated recording on my laptop, configured to document any unauthorized access to my personal files. When Marcus arrived for the maintenance appointment, he was his usual friendly self. Tall, athletically built, with an easy smile and casual confidence that had never seemed suspicious before. He wore the standard building maintenance uniform and carried the professional demeanor that had made me comfortable with his presence in my home for over 2 years. Now, knowing what I suspected, every interaction felt loaded with deception. Marcus completed the faucet repair efficiently, discussing the weather and asking about my work with the same conversational ease he'd always maintained. After finishing the primary task, he asked to use my bathroom, a reasonable request that I granted while watching him carefully. Instead of heading to the guest bathroom near the kitchen, he walked toward my bedroom area, claiming he thought it would be more convenient. The deviation from his stated purpose sent alarm bells through my mind, but I maintained a casual demeanor while mentally noting his movement patterns. When Marcus emerged from the back of my condo, he seemed slightly rushed, different from his usual relaxed pace. He gathered his tools quickly and left with polite efficiency, but something in his behavior had changed. The easy confidence was replaced by subtle nervousness that my trained eye recognized as the discomfort of someone who'd just committed a crime. After Marcus left, I immediately checked my security footage. The laptop recording showed him entering my home office during his bathroom visit, spending nearly 3 minutes photographing documents in my filing cabinet with his cell phone. The images were clear enough to identify specific papers he'd accessed, including backup credit card statements I kept for tax purposes. Marcus had used his legitimate access to my home to gather additional financial information, probably planning to expand his theft beyond the single card he'd already compromised. The security camera captured even more damning evidence. Marcus had opened my desk drawer and photographed my business checkbook, my backup debit card, and several financial documents that contained account numbers and personal identification information. He wasn't just stealing from my existing credit card. He was gathering resources to potentially commit identity theft on a much larger scale. I sat in my living.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Room that evening, reviewing the footage with a mixture of rage and grim satisfaction. Marcus had handed me everything I needed to destroy him legally. Video evidence of theft, documentation of unauthorized access to personal financial information, and a clear pattern of fraud spanning several months. But more importantly, he'd revealed the scope of his criminal intentions. This wasn't opportunistic theft, it was systematic financial predation. The next morning, I began building the case that would end Marcus Thompson's freedom and financial stability permanently. I compiled every piece of evidence into a comprehensive file. Credit card statements showing months of fraudulent charges, building access logs correlating his presence with theft dates, security footage documenting his unauthorized access to my personal documents, and photographic evidence of him stealing financial information during legitimate maintenance visits. But I wanted more than just criminal prosecution. Marcus had violated my trust, invaded my privacy, and stolen from me for months, while maintaining a facade of professional respectability. I wanted him to understand that stealing from the wrong person could result in consequences far beyond anything he'd imagined when he decided to fund his entertainment habits with my money. I contacted my colleague Sarah Chen, a criminal defense attorney who specialized in white-collar crime prosecution. Sarah and I had worked together on several corporate fraud cases, and she understood the intricacies of building bulletproof financial crime cases. When I explained the situation and showed her my evidence file, her expression shifted from professional interest to personal outrage. Marcus Thompson is about to learn why you don't steal from someone who understands the legal system better than most prosecutors, Sarah said after reviewing my documentation. This evidence package is better than anything most police departments could compile. We can pursue criminal charges, civil recovery, and professional destruction simultaneously. The beauty of our approach was its comprehensiveness. Criminal charges would result in potential jail time and permanent criminal record consequences. Civil litigation would allow me to recover not just the stolen money but also punitive damages, legal fees, and compensation for the time I'd spent investigating his theft. Professional destruction would ensure that Marcus never again had access to people's homes and personal information through legitimate employment. Sarah explained that Washington state treated credit card fraud as a serious felony, especially when combined with identity theft and burglary charges. Marcus's use of his building access to steal personal information constituted burglary under state law. His systematic pattern of fraud demonstrated criminal intent rather than accidental misuse. The video evidence of him photographing additional financial documents showed ongoing criminal enterprise rather than isolated incidents. We decided to let Marcus continue his theft for 2 more weeks while we prepared our legal strategy. This would establish an even clearer pattern of ongoing criminal behavior and potentially catch him in additional crimes that would strengthen our case. I monitored my credit card daily, documenting each new fraudulent charge while building an increasingly powerful case for his prosecution. During those 2 weeks, Marcus charged an additional $400 to various adult entertainment platforms, apparently growing bolder with what he perceived as successful theft. Each charge was another nail in the coffin of his freedom and financial stability. He had no idea that every transaction was being documented as evidence in a legal case that would destroy his life completely. The charges revealed disturbing patterns about Marcus's personal habits and financial desperation. Multiple subscriptions to different platforms suggested someone with compulsive sexual behavior and poor impulse control. The increasing frequency and amounts indicated someone spiraling deeper into addiction and debt. Marcus wasn't just stealing for occasional entertainment. He was funding a dangerous pattern of behavior that was probably destroying his personal relationships and financial stability. I used those 2 weeks to investigate Marcus's background more thoroughly. Public record searches revealed a troubling history of financial instability, including 2 previous bankruptcies, multiple evictions, and several civil judgments for unpaid debts. Marcus Thompson wasn't just someone who'd made a poor decision about stealing from me. He was someone with a long pattern of financial irresponsibility and questionable judgment. His employment history showed frequent job changes, usually leaving positions after short periods without clear explanations. The building management company had hired him despite this checkered background, probably desperate for maintenance staff in Seattle's competitive employment market. Their failure to properly vet Marcus's background had enabled his access to dozens of residents, homes, and personal information. Most damaging of all, I discovered that Marcus had a pending child support case, where he owed over $15,000 in back payments to his ex-wife. His theft from me was probably motivated by financial desperation rather than mere convenience. This information would be crucial for demonstrating his motive and ensuring that courts understood the premeditated nature of his crimes. Sarah and I spent hours planning our legal strategy with the thoroughness of generals preparing for war. We would file criminal charges first, using the overwhelming evidence to ensure Marcus's arrest and prevent him from destroying evidence or fleeing. Simultaneously, we'd pursue emergency civil injunctions to freeze his assets and prevent him from spending any more stolen money before we could recover it. The civil lawsuit would seek treble damages under Washington's fraud statutes, meaning Marcus would owe 3 times the amount he'd stolen, plus legal fees and court costs. Given the documented theft amount and the strength of our evidence, we estimated Marcus would face financial obligations exceeding $50,000. For someone already facing bankruptcy and child support debt, this would be financially devastating. Professional consequences would extend beyond the immediate legal case. I planned to notify the building management company about Marcus's criminal behavior, ensuring his immediate termination and preventing him from accessing other residents' homes. I would also report his crimes to industry associations and licensing boards, making it virtually impossible for him to obtain similar employment in the future. Sarah explained that the video evidence of Marcus stealing additional financial information meant we could also pursue identity theft charges, which carried significantly more severe penalties than simple credit card fraud. Washington state treated identity theft as a Class B felony, punishable by up to 10 years in prison and substantial fines. Marcus's systematic documentation of my personal information demonstrated clear intent to commit ongoing financial crimes. The final piece of our strategy involved timing the revelation for maximum impact on Marcus's life. Rather than simply having him arrested at work, we planned to coordinate with prosecutors to execute search warrants on his home and workplace simultaneously. This would ensure that any evidence stored on his personal devices would be preserved, while maximizing the professional and personal humiliation of his arrest. 2 weeks after implementing our surveillance strategy, I had documented over $600 in additional fraudulent charges and captured video evidence of Marcus accessing my building's package room without authorization, probably looking for additional theft opportunities. The evidence file had grown into a comprehensive case that would ensure his conviction and maximum sentencing. The morning of Marcus's arrest, I arrived at my office early and waited for Sarah's call confirming that warrants had been executed. At 8:37 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text message that filled me with savage satisfaction. Package delivered. Marcus Thompson's day just became very interesting. The coordinated arrests happened simultaneously at the building where Marcus worked, and his apartment in a less affluent neighborhood south of downtown Seattle. Police found additional evidence of financial fraud on his personal computer, including stored credit card information from other building residents and records of fraudulent purchases dating back over 18 months. Marcus hadn't just been stealing from me. He'd been systematically defrauding multiple residents for well over a year. The scope of Marcus's criminal enterprise was far more extensive than I'd initially suspected. Police discovered that he'd been using his building access to steal mail, photograph personal documents, and gather financial information from at least 12 different residents. The total amount of documented theft exceeded $28,000, transforming what I'd thought was personal victimization into evidence of systematic criminal enterprise. Marcus's computer contained detailed files on building residents, including notes about their schedules, financial information, and personal habits. He'd been studying people like prey, identifying the most vulnerable targets, and planning his thefts with disturbing precision. My case had accidentally uncovered a much larger criminal operation that had been victimizing innocent people for months. When police arrested Marcus at the building, several residents gathered to watch, probably recognizing him as the maintenance supervisor who'd had access to their homes. The professional humiliation was exactly what I'd hoped for. Marcus went from respected building employee to criminal suspect in full view of the people whose trust he'd violated. His reputation in the community was destroyed as thoroughly as his freedom. The building management company immediately terminated Marcus's employment and began internal investigations to assess their liability for his crimes. They faced potential lawsuits from multiple residents whose personal information had been compromised during Marcus's systematic theft operation. Their failure to properly screen his background and monitor his access to residents' homes could result in substantial civil liability. Sarah called me that afternoon with updates that exceeded my most optimistic expectations. Marcus had been charged with 12 counts of identity theft, 8 counts of credit card fraud, 6 counts of burglary, and 1 count of organized criminal enterprise. The combined charges carried a potential sentence of over 40 years in prison. Even with plea negotiations, Marcus was looking at substantial prison time and permanent criminal record consequences. The civil cases would be equally devastating. With 12 victims and documented theft exceeding $28,000, Marcus faced civil liability potentially reaching 6 figures when treble damages, legal fees, and punitive awards were calculated. His financial obligations would exceed anything he could possibly pay, ensuring permanent economic consequences for his crimes. Marcus's child support debt, combined with his new criminal charges and civil liability, meant that he would emerge from prison facing financial obligations that would follow him for the rest of his life. Even if he eventually found employment after serving his sentence, garnishments and legal judgments would consume most of his income permanently. His decision to steal from me had triggered consequences that would destroy his financial stability for decades. The psychological satisfaction of watching Marcus's world collapse was almost as rewarding as the legal victory itself. For months, he'd felt clever and superior, stealing from residents while maintaining a facade of trustworthy professionalism. He'd probably laughed about his ability to fund his entertainment habits with other people's money, while they remained oblivious to his theft. Now Marcus was discovering that his victims weren't all helpless or naive. Some of them understood the legal system well enough to ensure that criminal behavior resulted in maximum consequences. His arrest had been coordinated with prosecutorial precision, his evidence had been gathered with professional thoroughness, and his prosecution would be pursued with relentless determination. The local news coverage of Marcus's arrest focused on the systematic nature of his crimes and the vulnerability of building residents to employees with master key access. The story highlighted the importance of background checks and proper oversight of maintenance staff. Marcus's face appeared on evening news broadcasts as an example of how financial predators exploit trust and access to victimize innocent people. Professional consequences extended beyond his immediate termination. Marcus's arrest triggered reviews of security protocols at buildings throughout Seattle. Property management companies began implementing additional oversight measures and background check requirements. His crimes had exposed systemic vulnerabilities that would result in industry-wide changes designed to prevent similar exploitation. I testified before a grand jury about Marcus's systematic theft and provided evidence that ensured his indictment on all proposed charges. The experience of describing his violation of my trust and privacy to a room full of citizens was cathartic and empowering. Marcus had tried to make me a victim, but instead, he'd transformed me into the instrument of his complete destruction. The restitution hearing revealed the full scope of Marcus's financial obligations to his victims. Beyond the stolen money, he owed legal fees, investigation costs, credit monitoring services, and punitive damages designed to deter similar crimes. The judge awarded maximum restitution amounts under state law, ensuring that Marcus's criminal behavior would result in permanent financial consequences. Marcus's defense attorney attempted to negotiate a plea agreement that would reduce his sentence in exchange for full restitution payments. But the systematic nature of his crimes and the number of victims involved meant that prosecutors had little incentive to offer meaningful concessions. The evidence was overwhelming, the crimes were serious, and the community impact demanded substantial punishment. During the sentencing hearing, I delivered a victim impact statement that detailed not just the financial harm Marcus had caused, but the violation of trust and privacy that his crimes represented. I explained how his theft had affected my sense of security in my own home and my ability to trust service providers with access to my personal space. The judge listened intently as I described the broader implications of Marcus's systematic exploitation of building residents. Marcus received a sentence of 8 years in state prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation with strict restitution requirements. The judge emphasized that Marcus's abuse of his position of trust and his systematic targeting of vulnerable residents demanded substantial punishment to protect the community and deter similar crimes. The sentence exceeded what his defense attorney had hoped for and reflected the seriousness with which the court viewed his systematic criminal enterprise. The civil lawsuit concluded with a judgment exceeding $62,000, including treble damages, attorney fees, and punitive awards designed to punish Marcus's deliberate criminal behavior. The judgment included provisions for wage garnishment that would continue until the full amount was paid, ensuring that Marcus would face ongoing financial consequences for decades after his release from prison. Marcus's apartment was seized and sold to partially satisfy the restitution judgments, leaving him homeless upon his eventual release from prison. His personal belongings were auctioned to contribute toward victim compensation. The systematic destruction of his material wealth was proportionate to the systematic way he'd violated his victims' financial security. The professional consequences of Marcus's conviction extended far beyond his immediate imprisonment. His criminal record would prevent him from obtaining employment in property management, maintenance, or any position requiring access to people's homes or personal information. Background check requirements would flag his convictions and ensure that he never again had legitimate access to potential victims. 6 months after Marcus's sentencing, I received a letter from him attempting to apologize for his crimes and requesting my support for an early parole application. The letter was a masterpiece of self-pity and manipulation, claiming that his theft had been motivated by financial desperation and family obligations. He asked me to consider the impact of his imprisonment on his children and suggested that he'd learn from his mistakes. I responded to Marcus's letter with a detailed explanation of why he would never receive my support for early release. I outlined the systematic nature of his crimes, the violation of trust his theft represented, and the ongoing impact his criminal behavior had on my sense of security and privacy. I explained that true accountability required serving his full sentence and paying complete restitution to all his victims. The letter I sent to Marcus was also forwarded to the parole board, ensuring that they understood the victim perspective on his eventual release application. I wanted parole officials to understand that Marcus's crimes weren't impulsive mistakes, but calculated exploitation that had victimized multiple innocent people over an extended period. 3 years after Marcus's conviction, I still receive quarterly updates about his restitution payments and prison status. The automated notifications serve as regular reminders that criminal behavior results in lasting consequences. Marcus's decision to steal from me for OnlyFans subscriptions had triggered a legal response that would affect him for the rest of his life. The building where Marcus had worked implemented comprehensive security reforms, including enhanced background checks, regular audits of employee access, and improved monitoring of maintenance activities. The management company settled civil lawsuits with all affected residents and established victim compensation funds. Marcus's crimes had catalyzed industry-wide improvements that would protect future residents from similar exploitation. My experience pursuing Marcus's prosecution had reinforced my belief in the importance of holding criminals accountable through comprehensive legal action. Too often, financial predators escape meaningful consequences because their victims don't understand how to effectively use the legal system. Marcus had chosen the wrong target for his theft, and his punishment reflected the power of proper legal response to criminal behavior. The satisfaction of watching Marcus face complete consequences for his systematic theft never diminished. He'd thought he was clever enough to steal from people without detection, but his criminal behavior had ultimately resulted in the destruction of his freedom, financial stability, and future prospects. His OnlyFans subscriptions had been expensive in ways he'd never imagined when he started using my credit card. Years later, when people ask me about the importance of monitoring financial statements and protecting personal information, I tell them about Marcus Thompson. His case demonstrates how quickly trusted individuals can become dangerous predators, and how important it is to respond decisively when criminal behavior is discovered. Marcus learned that some people fight back with everything they have, and the consequences can last a lifetime. The story of Marcus's downfall serves as a cautionary tale about the risks of financial fraud and the importance of choosing victims carefully. His decision to steal from someone who understood the legal system had transformed what he'd thought was easy money into a nightmare of criminal prosecution and permanent consequences. Sometimes, the person you choose to victimize is exactly the wrong person to cross. Marcus Thompson had subscribed to OnlyFans with my credit card, but I'd used my attorney to subscribe him to a lifetime of poverty, legal consequences, and social destruction. The subscription he'd purchased had been far more expensive than anything available on adult entertainment platforms. His theft had cost him everything, and the payment plan would continue for the rest of his life. The morning after Marcus's arrest brought an unexpected phone call that would reveal the true depth of his criminal enterprise. Detective Patricia Williams from the Seattle Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit was calling to inform me that my case had opened a much larger investigation into organized fraud targeting building residents across the entire metropolitan area. Marcus Thompson wasn't just stealing from our building, Detective Williams explained in her crisp, professional tone. He'd been part of a sophisticated network of maintenance workers, property managers, and even postal employees who'd been systematically exploiting their access to commit identity theft and financial fraud. My evidence had provided the breakthrough they needed to expose what they suspected was a multi-million-dollar criminal operation. The revelation that Marcus's crimes extended far beyond what I'd discovered sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with Seattle's morning fog. I'd thought I was dealing with an opportunistic thief who'd gotten greedy with my credit card information. Instead, I'd stumbled onto someone involved in systematic criminal enterprise that had probably victimized hundreds of people across the region. Detective Williams requested a meeting to discuss my role as a key witness in their expanded investigation. She explained that the evidence I'd gathered against Marcus was more comprehensive than anything their department typically received from fraud victims. My legal background and systematic approach to documentation had created a case file that prosecutors described as prosecution gold. They wanted my assistance in understanding how Marcus's operation functioned and identifying other potential victims. The meeting took place at police headquarters in a conference room that felt more like a war room than a typical interview space. Charts covered the walls showing connections between suspected criminals, financial institutions, and victim demographics. Detective Williams introduced me to a team of investigators who'd been tracking this fraud network for over 2 years without sufficient evidence to make arrests. Marcus's computer and personal records had revealed communication with at least 15 other individuals involved in similar theft operations throughout Washington state and Oregon. They used encrypted messaging apps to share victim information, coordinate theft activities, and distribute stolen financial data. The network had established sophisticated systems for converting stolen credit card information into untraceable cash and valuable goods. The investigators showed me evidence seized from Marcus's apartment that demonstrated the professional level of his criminal activities. He maintained detailed spreadsheets tracking victim information, theft amounts, and success rates for different types of fraud. Marcus had been treating criminal behavior like a business, optimizing his approaches and maximizing profits while minimizing risk of detection. Most disturbing was Marcus's role as a recruiter for the fraud network. He'd been identifying and training other building maintenance workers to exploit their access to residents, homes, and personal information. The network provided new recruits with equipment for photographing documents, guidance on avoiding detection, and systems for laundering stolen money. Marcus had been spreading his criminal expertise throughout the property management industry. Detective Williams explained that my evidence had provided crucial insights into how the network operated and recruited new members. The video footage of Marcus stealing my financial information had been shared with federal authorities investigating similar fraud patterns in other states. My case had become a cornerstone of a much larger prosecution that would potentially result in dozens of arrests and the destruction of the entire criminal network. The federal involvement transformed my personal case into something much more significant. FBI agents specializing in organized financial crime joined the investigation, bringing resources and expertise that exceeded anything local authorities could provide. Special Agent Rebecca Chen explained that this fraud network represented exactly the type of systematic criminal enterprise that federal racketeering laws were designed to combat. Agent Chen's explanation of racketeering prosecution was both fascinating and terrifying. The federal government could pursue RICO charges against everyone involved in the network, treating their individual crimes as part of a larger criminal enterprise. Under RICO statutes, participants could face sentences of up to 20 years in federal prison, plus forfeiture of all assets acquired through criminal activity. Marcus's OnlyFans subscriptions had connected him to a case that could result in life-destroying federal prosecution. The scope of the investigation required my continued cooperation as both victim and key witness. Federal prosecutors needed my testimony to establish how the network operated and demonstrate the systematic nature of their criminal activities. My legal background made me an ideal witness who could explain complex financial evidence to juries and provide credible testimony about the sophisticated methods used by the defendants. Preparing for federal prosecution meant working with Assistant United States Attorney David Rodriguez, a seasoned prosecutor who specialized in complex financial crime cases. Rodriguez explained that my case against Marcus had evolved into United States v. Thompson and 14 co-conspirators, a federal racketeering prosecution that would likely take years to complete and result in sentences far exceeding anything Marcus would have faced for simple credit card fraud. The investigation revealed that Marcus's network had been operating for over 4 years, systematically targeting building residents, postal customers, and clients of various service providers who had legitimate access to personal information. They'd developed sophisticated systems for sharing victim data, coordinating theft activities, and converting stolen information into profitable criminal enterprises. The total documented theft exceeded $3 million across hundreds of victims. My role as the victim whose evidence exposed the entire network meant that I became central to the federal prosecution strategy. Rodriguez needed me to testify about Marcus's systematic approach to theft and demonstrate how his individual crimes fit into the larger pattern of organized criminal activity. My testimony would help establish that Marcus wasn't just an opportunistic thief, but a sophisticated criminal working within an organized enterprise. The personal impact of becoming a federal witness extended far beyond my original goal of prosecuting Marcus for credit card fraud. Federal authorities required detailed background investigations, security clearances, and ongoing protection measures that transformed my daily life. The simple desire to hold Marcus accountable for stealing from me had evolved into a commitment to destroying an entire criminal network. Security briefings revealed that other network members might attempt to intimidate or harm witnesses who could threaten their freedom. Federal marshals provided personal security assessments and recommended precautions for protecting myself from potential retaliation. The convenience of pursuing Marcus's prosecution had been replaced by the complex reality of testifying against organized criminals with significant resources and motivation to silence witnesses. The first federal grand jury appearance required me to present evidence about Marcus's crimes to 23 citizens who would decide whether federal charges were appropriate. The experience was both empowering and sobering, as I described Marcus's systematic theft to people who understood that their decision would affect not just Marcus but everyone connected to his criminal network. Grand jury proceedings revealed evidence that expanded my understanding of how deeply Marcus had penetrated my personal life and financial information. Federal investigators had recovered detailed files that Marcus maintained about my daily routines, work schedule, travel patterns, and even personal relationships. He'd been studying me like a research subject, gathering information that could be used for identity theft far beyond simple credit card fraud. The files Marcus kept about me included photographs of my home interior, copies of personal documents he'd accessed during maintenance visits, and notes about my financial habits and security practices. He'd been planning comprehensive identity theft that would have devastated my credit, emptied my bank accounts, and potentially destroyed my professional reputation. My discovery of the OnlyFans charges had prevented crimes that could have taken years to detect and resolve. Federal prosecutors used my case to demonstrate the network's sophisticated approach to victim selection and exploitation. Marcus's detailed files on building residents showed that the network specifically targeted high-income professionals who might not immediately notice moderate financial theft. They developed profiles for ideal victims and systematic approaches for exploiting their access to personal information. The prosecution strategy required extensive preparation for cross-examination by defense attorneys representing network members. Federal public defenders were skilled at attacking witness credibility and creating reasonable doubt about the systematic nature of seemingly unrelated crimes. My legal background provided advantages in understanding their tactics, but it also made me a high-value target for aggressive questioning designed to undermine my testimony. Preparation sessions with federal prosecutors involved detailed reviews of every aspect of my case and my relationship with Marcus. They needed to ensure that defense attorneys couldn't identify inconsistencies or gaps that might cast doubt on my testimony. The process was exhaustive and invasive, requiring me to document and explain every interaction I'd ever had with Marcus over 2 years of building maintenance. The federal prosecution timeline extended far beyond my original expectations for resolving Marcus's theft. Individual credit card fraud cases typically concluded within months, but federal racketeering prosecutions could take years to complete. My involvement would continue through multiple grand jury appearances, preliminary hearings, motion practices, and eventually a trial that could last several weeks. Defense attorneys began filing motions challenging various aspects of the federal case, including the admissibility of evidence seized from Marcus's apartment and the scope of the racketeering charges. Each motion required responses that sometimes involved my testimony or input about how evidence had been obtained. My simple desire to prosecute credit card fraud had evolved into ongoing involvement in complex federal litigation. The media attention surrounding the federal prosecution created unexpected complications for my personal and professional life. Local news outlets began covering the fraud network case as a major story about organized crime targeting building residents. My role as the key witness whose evidence exposed the network meant that my name appeared in court documents and news reports about the prosecution. Professional colleagues began recognizing my involvement in the federal case, leading to conversations that sometimes felt invasive and uncomfortable. While most people expressed support for my decision to pursue prosecution, others questioned whether the extensive time commitment and media attention were worthwhile for recovering relatively small amounts of stolen money. They didn't understand that my motivation had evolved beyond personal restitution to ensuring justice for hundreds of other victims. The federal investigation revealed victim impact far beyond anything I'd initially imagined. Marcus's network had targeted elderly residents, disabled individuals, and other vulnerable populations who were less likely to detect or report financial theft. Some victims had lost their life savings to systematic fraud that exploited their trust in service providers and building employees. Meeting other victims during preparation for federal prosecution was both heartbreaking and empowering. Elderly residents described how Marcus and his associates had stolen money intended for medical care. Disabled individuals explained how theft had affected their ability to afford necessary services. And young families shared stories about financial devastation that had destroyed their economic stability. My case had become part of a larger effort to provide justice for people who'd been systematically exploited by predatory criminals. The emotional impact of learning about other victims transformed my perspective on the importance of federal prosecution. Marcus's theft from me had been personally violating but financially manageable given my professional income and legal knowledge. For other victims, his crimes had caused genuine hardship that affected their health, housing, and basic survival. The federal prosecution represented an opportunity to provide justice for people who couldn't have obtained it themselves. Federal sentencing guidelines for racketeering convictions meant that Marcus faced potential imprisonment far exceeding anything he would have received for simple credit card fraud. If convicted on all federal charges, he could face sentences of 15 to 20 years in federal prison, plus substantial financial penalties and asset forfeiture. His decision to join a criminal network had transformed minor theft into major federal crimes with life-altering consequences. Asset forfeiture proceedings targeted everything Marcus had acquired during his participation in the fraud network. Federal authorities could seize his apartment, vehicle, personal belongings, and any assets that might have been purchased with proceeds from criminal activity. The forfeiture process would ensure that Marcus couldn't benefit financially from his crimes and would provide additional resources for victim compensation. The complexity of federal asset forfeiture required additional testimony about Marcus's lifestyle and spending patterns during the period of his criminal activity. Prosecutors needed to establish that his standard of living exceeded his legitimate income and demonstrate that criminal proceeds had been used to purchase forfeitable assets. My observations about Marcus's behavior and possessions during building maintenance visits became evidence in forfeiture proceedings. Preparing for federal trial required understanding the prosecution strategy for presenting evidence about the entire criminal network to a jury. Prosecutors planned to use my case as the foundation for explaining how the network operated, and then build upon that foundation to demonstrate the scope of their criminal enterprise. My testimony would provide context for understanding evidence about other network members and their individual contributions to the overall conspiracy. Federal trial preparation included extensive witness preparation that exceeded anything required for typical civil or criminal cases. Federal prosecutors needed to ensure that witnesses could effectively communicate complex financial evidence to jurors who might not understand sophisticated fraud schemes. The preparation process involved practice testimony sessions, cross-examination simulations, and detailed reviews of all evidence that might be used during trial. The witness protection considerations for federal prosecution created ongoing security concerns that affected my daily life and professional activities. Federal marshals conducted regular threat assessments and provided guidance about personal security measures that might be necessary during the prosecution period. The simple goal of holding Marcus accountable for credit card fraud had evolved into a complex commitment that required significant personal sacrifice and lifestyle adjustments. Federal prosecutors explained that my cooperation would likely result in requests for testimony in related cases, as other network members were prosecuted. The evidence I'd gathered against Marcus had established investigative techniques and legal precedents that could be applied to prosecuting other members of the fraud network. My involvement might continue for years as federal authorities pursued comprehensive prosecution of everyone connected to the criminal enterprise. The financial recovery aspect of federal prosecution included restitution orders that exceeded anything available through state criminal cases or individual civil litigation. Federal judges could order comprehensive restitution that covered not just direct theft amounts but also investigation costs, legal fees, credit monitoring expenses, and other damages resulting from criminal activity. Marcus's federal conviction could result in restitution obligations that would follow him for the rest of his life. Federal prosecution also provided access to victim compensation funds that could supplement individual restitution orders. The federal government maintained funds specifically designed to provide immediate assistance to crime victims, while criminal cases proceeded through lengthy prosecution processes. These funds could provide compensation even if individual defendants lacked assets to satisfy restitution orders. The investigation into Marcus's criminal network revealed connections to similar fraud operations in other regions of the country. Federal authorities suspected that the network Marcus joined was part of a larger national organization that specialized in training criminals to exploit access gained through legitimate employment. My case had potentially exposed a nationwide criminal enterprise that affected thousands of victims across multiple states. Coordinating with federal authorities in other jurisdictions required additional testimony and evidence sharing that extended my involvement in prosecution efforts beyond the Pacific Northwest. FBI agents from field offices in California, Texas, and Florida contacted me to discuss similarities between Marcus's activities and fraud patterns they were investigating in their regions. My evidence was being used to build cases against criminals I'd never heard of in states I'd never visited. The national scope of the investigation revealed that Marcus's relatively modest theft from my credit card had connected to a criminal enterprise that generated millions of dollars in annual profits for its organizers. Federal authorities estimated that the network Marcus joined had been responsible for systematic theft affecting over 2,000 victims across 15 states. My discovery of OnlyFans charges had triggered the exposure of one of the largest organized fraud operations federal authorities had ever investigated. Federal authorities began preparing for multiple trials as the investigation expanded to include network organizers and regional coordinators who managed criminal activities across different geographical areas. My testimony would be required in several of these trials, as prosecutors worked to demonstrate the systematic nature of the criminal enterprise and establish connections between individual defendants and the larger organization. The complexity of federal prosecution meant that my involvement would continue for several years, as cases proceeded through federal courts in multiple jurisdictions. The simple decision to investigate fraudulent charges on my credit card had evolved into a commitment to help federal authorities destroy a national criminal network that had victimized thousands of innocent people. The personal satisfaction of pursuing comprehensive prosecution was tempered by the recognition that federal involvement had transformed my life in ways I'd never anticipated. The convenience and control of handling Marcus's prosecution, personally, had been replaced by the complex reality of federal witness obligations that would affect my personal and professional activities for years to come. Federal prosecutors assured me that my cooperation was essential for ensuring justice for victims who couldn't have obtained it themselves, and for preventing future crimes by destroying the network's ability to recruit and train new criminals. My evidence had provided the foundation for prosecutions that would protect countless potential victims from systematic exploitation by organized financial predators. The federal grand jury returned indictments against 17 members of Marcus's criminal network, including charges for racketeering conspiracy, wire fraud, mail fraud, identity theft, and money laundering. The indictments represented one of the largest organized fraud prosecutions in the history of the federal district, with potential sentences that could result in decades of imprisonment for network organizers and leaders. Marcus's individual charges included specific counts related to his theft from me, plus additional charges for his participation in the larger criminal enterprise. Federal prosecutors explained that his cooperation with federal authorities could potentially reduce his sentence, but his leadership role in recruiting other criminals meant that he faced substantial imprisonment regardless of any assistance he might provide to investigators. The plea negotiations for federal defendants revealed the internal structure of the criminal network and Marcus's specific role in training new recruits to exploit their employment access. Federal authorities learned that Marcus had been responsible for teaching other building maintenance workers how to steal personal information, avoid detection, and convert stolen data into profitable criminal activity. His role as an educator and recruiter meant that his crimes had multiplied through the activities of people he'd trained to commit similar offenses. Federal authorities estimated that Marcus's training activities had contributed to criminal activity that affected over 300 victims beyond his direct theft targets. His recruitment and education of other criminals had amplified the impact of his individual crimes and contributed to a pattern of systematic exploitation that extended far beyond his personal financial benefit. The scope of his criminal influence exceeded anything I'd imagined when I first discovered fraudulent charges on my credit card. The federal prosecution would provide comprehensive justice for systematic criminal activity that had affected hundreds of innocent victims across multiple states. Marcus's decision to use my credit card for OnlyFans subscriptions had triggered federal law enforcement action that would destroy a nationwide criminal enterprise and prevent countless future crimes against vulnerable individuals who trusted service providers with access to their personal information. My cooperation with federal authorities had evolved from a personal quest for justice into participation in a comprehensive effort to protect society from organized financial predators who exploited legitimate employment to commit systematic theft. The case represented exactly the type of meaningful legal work that had inspired my decision to become an attorney, even though I'd never expected to pursue it as a crime victim rather than a prosecutor. The federal trial date was scheduled for 18 months in the future, providing time for comprehensive preparation and allowing federal authorities to complete their investigation of the entire criminal network. My involvement would continue throughout this period as prosecutors refined their strategy and prepared for what they expected to be one of the most significant organized crime trials in recent federal court history. The federal trial began on a crisp October morning in downtown Seattle's federal courthouse, with media attention that exceeded anything I'd anticipated for a financial fraud case. The prosecution of United States v. Thompson and 16 co-conspirators had become a landmark case that attracted national coverage about organized crime targeting vulnerable consumers through employment access schemes. Judge Patricia Morrison presided over jury selection with the efficiency of someone who understood the complexity of the case ahead. Selecting 12 jurors and 4 alternates required extensive questioning about their ability to understand sophisticated financial evidence and remain impartial despite media coverage of the case. The process took 3 days as attorneys worked to identify citizens capable of fairly evaluating evidence about systematic criminal enterprise spanning multiple states. Assistant United States Attorney David Rodriguez delivered an opening statement that positioned my case as the foundation for understanding how the entire criminal network operated. He explained to jurors that what began as simple credit card fraud against Elena Rodriguez had exposed a sophisticated criminal enterprise that had systematically victimized thousands of innocent people across 15 states over 4 years of operation. Rodriguez used visual presentations to show jurors the scope of the criminal network, with Marcus Thompson positioned as a key recruiter and trainer who had expanded the organization's reach by teaching other employees how to exploit their access to personal information. The prosecution strategy focused on demonstrating that individual crimes were part of a larger pattern of organized criminal activity that justified federal racketeering charges. My testimony began on the 4th day of trial, after prosecutors had established the foundation for understanding the criminal network's operations. Taking the witness stand in federal court felt surreal after months of preparation, but my legal background provided confidence in presenting evidence clearly and responding effectively to anticipated defense challenges. Rodriguez guided me through detailed testimony about Marcus's systematic theft, the evidence I'd gathered documenting his crimes, and the sophisticated methods he'd used to avoid detection while expanding his criminal activities. The jury listened intently as I described discovering the OnlyFans charges and the investigation that had revealed Marcus's participation in organized fraud affecting hundreds of other victims. The defense cross-examination focused on attempting to portray Marcus's crimes as isolated incidents rather than evidence of systematic criminal enterprise. Defense attorney Michael Sullivan questioned whether my evidence actually proved coordination with other criminals or simply demonstrated individual criminal behavior that happened to coincide with similar crimes by other defendants. Sullivan's cross-examination strategy involved challenging the timeline of Marcus's criminal activities and questioning whether his communication with other network members constituted criminal conspiracy or merely social interaction among people who happened to commit similar crimes. The defense needed to create reasonable doubt about the organized nature of the criminal enterprise to avoid federal racketeering convictions. My legal training proved invaluable during cross-examination as I maintained composure while addressing defense challenges to my evidence and conclusions. Sullivan attempted to suggest that my investigation had been biased by personal anger rather than objective evidence gathering, but my systematic documentation and professional approach undermined his arguments about investigative reliability. The prosecution presented evidence seized from Marcus's apartment that demonstrated his role in training other criminals and coordinating theft activities across multiple jurisdictions. FBI agents testified about encrypted communications recovered from Marcus's devices that showed detailed planning sessions and profit-sharing arrangements with other network members. Federal agents described Marcus's apartment as resembling a criminal training facility, with equipment for photographing documents, guides for avoiding detection during theft activities, and detailed records of successful fraud techniques that had been shared with other network members. The evidence demonstrated that Marcus had transformed criminal behavior into a systematic enterprise that generated substantial profits through organized exploitation. The testimony about Marcus's recruitment activities revealed how the criminal network had expanded by targeting employees with legitimate access to personal information. Marcus had specifically recruited building maintenance workers, postal employees, and service providers who could exploit their professional access to commit identity theft and financial fraud without immediate suspicion. Victim testimony provided powerful evidence about the human impact of the criminal network's activities. Elderly residents described how systematic theft had affected their ability to afford medical care and basic necessities. Disabled individuals explained how financial fraud had disrupted their access to essential services. Young families shared stories about economic devastation that had destroyed their financial stability and credit ratings. The emotional impact of victim testimony was profound as jurors learned about real people whose lives had been damaged by the defendants' systematic criminal activities. The prosecution's strategy of presenting individual stories within the context of organized enterprise helped jurors understand both the personal harm and the broader social damage caused by the criminal network. Federal agents testified about the national scope of the investigation and the connections between Marcus's activities and similar fraud operations in other states. The evidence demonstrated that the criminal network had established sophisticated systems for sharing victim information, coordinating theft activities, and laundering proceeds from systematic fraud. The money laundering evidence revealed how the criminal network had converted stolen financial information into untraceable assets through complex schemes involving cryptocurrency transactions, cash purchases, and offshore banking arrangements. The sophistication of their financial operations demonstrated that this was organized criminal enterprise, rather than opportunistic individual theft. Marcus's decision to testify in his own defense proved devastating to his case and helpful to federal prosecutors. His testimony revealed arrogance and lack of genuine remorse that undermined defense efforts to portray him as someone who'd made poor decisions rather than someone who'd deliberately chosen criminal behavior as a lifestyle. During his testimony, Marcus attempted to minimize his role in the criminal network and suggest that his theft from me had been an isolated incident motivated by temporary financial pressure. However, federal prosecutors used his own records and communications to demonstrate that his criminal activities had been systematic, profitable, and carefully planned over extended periods. Marcus's testimony included attempts to justify his theft by claiming that wealthy building residents wouldn't miss small amounts of money, and that his activities hadn't caused serious harm to anyone. His lack of empathy for victims and continued minimization of his criminal behavior reinforced prosecution arguments about his character and criminal mindset. The cross-examination of Marcus by federal prosecutors systematically destroyed his credibility and revealed the extent of his criminal activities. Prosecutors used evidence from his own devices to contradict his testimony and demonstrate that his criminal behavior had been far more extensive and sophisticated than he was willing to admit. Federal prosecutors presented evidence that Marcus had stolen over $47,000 from various victims beyond the documented theft from my accounts. His systematic approach to financial fraud had affected dozens of innocent people whose trust he'd violated through his position as a building maintenance supervisor. The evidence about Marcus's training activities revealed that he'd been responsible for teaching criminal techniques to at least 12 other individuals who'd gone on to commit similar fraud in other locations. His role as an educator and recruiter had amplified the impact of his individual crimes and contributed to systematic victimization across multiple jurisdictions. Defense closing arguments attempted to create sympathy for Marcus by emphasizing his financial struggles and suggesting that desperation rather than greed had motivated his criminal behavior. Defense attorneys argued that federal racketeering charges were excessive for someone who'd committed relatively minor financial crimes motivated by personal financial pressure. The prosecution closing argument systematically refuted defense claims about Marcus's motivations and demonstrated that his criminal activities had been profitable, systematic, and deliberately harmful to vulnerable victims. Rodriguez emphasized that Marcus's theft from me had been just one example of systematic criminal behavior that had affected hundreds of innocent people. The jury deliberated for 6 days before returning guilty verdicts on all federal charges against Marcus and his co-conspirators. The convictions included racketeering conspiracy, wire fraud, mail fraud, identity theft, and money laundering charges that carried potential sentences of 20 years to life in federal prison. Judge Morrison scheduled sentencing hearings for 2 months after the verdicts, allowing time for comprehensive pre-sentence investigations and victim impact statement preparation. The Federal Probation Office would evaluate each defendant's criminal history, role in the conspiracy, and potential for rehabilitation before recommending appropriate sentences. The sentencing hearing provided an opportunity for victims to address the court about the impact of the defendants' criminal activities. I delivered a victim impact statement that described not just the financial harm Marcus had caused, but the violation of trust and privacy that his systematic theft represented. My victim impact statement emphasized that Marcus's crimes had affected my sense of security in my own home and my ability to trust service providers with access to personal information. I explained how his systematic theft had required extensive time and emotional energy to investigate and prosecute, disrupting my personal and professional life for over 2 years. The judge listened to victim impact statements from dozens of people whose lives had been affected by the criminal network's activities. The cumulative impact of their testimony demonstrated the widespread harm caused by the defendants, systematic exploitation of vulnerable individuals who'd trusted them with access to personal information. Judge Morrison sentenced Marcus to 18 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation with comprehensive restitution requirements. The sentence reflected his leadership role in the criminal network and his responsibility for training other criminals who'd gone on to victimize additional innocent people. The restitution order exceeded $93,000, including compensation for direct theft, investigation costs, legal fees, credit monitoring expenses, and punitive damages designed to reflect the systematic nature of Marcus's criminal activities. The judge emphasized that comprehensive restitution was necessary to provide justice for victims and deter similar criminal behavior. Federal asset forfeiture proceedings resulted in the seizure of Marcus's apartment, vehicle, and personal belongings that would be sold to satisfy restitution obligations. The forfeiture process ensured that Marcus couldn't benefit from his criminal activities and provided additional resources for victim compensation. The sentences for other network members ranged from 8 to 25 years in federal prison, with the highest sentences reserved for organizers who'd established and managed the criminal enterprise. The comprehensive prosecution had effectively destroyed the network's ability to continue operations and prevented future recruitment of new criminals. Federal authorities estimated that the prosecution had prevented millions of dollars in future criminal activity by destroying the network's operations and imprisoning its key members. The case had established legal precedents for prosecuting similar organized fraud operations and provided investigative techniques that could be applied to future cases. The media coverage of the sentencing emphasized the importance of comprehensive prosecution for organized financial crimes and the role of victim cooperation in ensuring justice for systematic criminal activity. My case had demonstrated that effective legal response could transform individual victimization into comprehensive justice for entire communities affected by organized crime. The personal satisfaction of watching Marcus receive comprehensive punishment for his systematic criminal behavior never diminished. His decision to steal from me for OnlyFans subscriptions had triggered federal law enforcement action that had destroyed his freedom, financial stability, and future prospects permanently. 3 years after Marcus's sentencing, I continued to receive quarterly updates about restitution payments and federal supervision compliance. The automated notifications served as regular reminders that comprehensive legal action could result in lasting consequences for criminal behavior that affected innocent people. The case had reinforced my belief in the importance of holding criminals accountable through systematic legal action rather than accepting minimal consequences for harmful behavior. Marcus's prosecution had provided justice not just for me, but for hundreds of other victims who couldn't have obtained meaningful legal remedy without federal intervention. My experience pursuing federal prosecution had demonstrated that individual victims could play crucial roles in exposing and destroying organized criminal enterprises that systematically exploited vulnerable people. The case had shown that comprehensive legal response could protect entire communities from predatory criminals who used legitimate employment to commit systematic theft. The professional impact of my involvement in federal prosecution had enhanced my reputation as someone willing to pursue comprehensive justice, regardless of personal cost or convenience. Colleagues and clients understood that I approached legal challenges with the same systematic thoroughness I'd applied to destroying Marcus's criminal network. Years later, when people asked about the importance of monitoring financial statements and responding decisively to evidence of criminal behavior, I told them about Marcus Thompson and the federal prosecution that had destroyed his criminal network. His case demonstrated that systematic legal response could transform individual victimization into comprehensive justice that protected entire communities from organized predators. Marcus Thompson had used my credit card to subscribe to OnlyFans, but I'd used federal prosecutors to subscribe him to 18 years of federal imprisonment, lifetime financial obligations, and permanent destruction of his criminal enterprise. His subscription to adult entertainment had been expensive in ways he'd never imagined, and the payment plan would continue for the rest of his life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.